Russia's President Vladimir Putin has been in a geopolitical standoff with the United States for so long that it's hard to remember how it started. 20 years ago, events shaped his core narrative about the harm Russia has suffered at the hands of a malevolent U.S. national security establishment. In other words, Putin was using these mothers as props to score geopolitical points. It's a response to trauma he adopted in earnest 20 years ago. In this video, we are going to talk about how Vladimir Putin's security responds to an attack. Before we start the video, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel for future updates. Let's start the video. It began with Beslan. Putin's speech to the nation the day after the siege of Beslan ended, September 4, 2004, was arguably the most consequential of his career. Typically, Western observers give that distinction to his fiery speech in Munich in early 2007, in which he threw down a gauntlet to the United States over NATO enlargement. But Beslan, in every way, laid the groundwork for Munich and did the most to shape, or at least reveal, the Putin we know and the governing philosophy we associate with him today. During his televised remarks, Putin looked better than he had during a hostage crisis at Moscow's Dubrovka Theater 2 years earlier. He seemed more in control, less haggard. He spoke with gravity and purpose. After the obligatory expressions of grief and condolences, his speech turned geopolitical, a rhetorical maneuver that many listeners at the time were not yet accustomed to. The reason terrorists had targeted Russia, Putin summarized, was that the country had fallen into a period of weakness after the breakup of the Soviet Union. "We were weak, and the weak get beaten," he explained. It was a uniquely succinct expression of what was to become a core principle for Putin: never admit weakness. He later went on to use the weakness argument as a creative pretext to appoint regional governors, a milestone in giving himself more power. From there, he continued, "Some want to tear off a juicy piece from us. Others help them. They help, presuming that Russia, as one of the largest nuclear powers in the world, still poses a threat to someone. Therefore, this threat must be eliminated. And terrorism, of course, is just an instrument for achieving these goals." Enter Ukraine. The traumas of 2004, however, weren't yet over for Putin. Less than 3 months after Beslan, he suffered another setback when his preferred candidate for president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, saw his fraud-tainted election overturned by the country's Supreme Court, under pressure from mass street protests. The pro-Europe candidate, Viktor Yushchenko, went on to win a new election. It was Ukraine's first post-Soviet popular revolt, the so-called Orange Revolution, and it was a personal slap in the face for Putin, who had twice congratulated Yanukovych on his phantom victory. Although the pro-West demonstrators who helped overturn Putin's choice for president of Ukraine couldn't have been more different from Basayev's terrorists, Putin must have decided both were equally devoid of agency. Just 3 days after Yanukovych's election had been nullified, during Putin's first-ever trip to Turkey, his sense of grievance and humiliation boiled over in public. In a preview of the anti-colonial rhetoric he has relied on to appeal to audiences in the global South since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he blamed Ukraine's revolution on the imagined actions of a kindly but strict man in a pith helmet, who taught second-class natives how they should live. If those ungrateful natives should protest their treatment, he said, they are subjected to bombing, as in Belgrade, Russia's lost opportunity. Individuals' subservience to the state, or to the ruler standing in for the state, is a long-standing cornerstone of Russian governance. Tsar Peter I and Joseph Stalin are lionized in Russia precisely for expanding the power and territory of the state to the exclusion of everything else. Individuals were sacrificed wholesale to advance the leader's purposes, and because there were no checks on his whims or paranoias, often for no purpose at all. Stalin today emerges as Russia's most admired historical ruler in online polls, in large part because, despite a purge of the military command that nearly lost the war against Nazi Germany before it began, his apologists insist he mobilized the country for victory. He gets a pass for the millions he killed through mass terror, forced collectivization, and famine, because he industrialized and urbanized a vast backward country for great power competition in historically near-record time. This ruler-centric view of Russia has been challenged by generations of dissidents and human rights advocates, of course, and even by a few Russian leaders themselves. The last to have done so was Dmitry Medvedev, who as president from 2008 to 2012 took aim at Stalin-style rule, proclaiming that no ambitions or achievements of the state could be valued more highly than the lives of individuals. In late 2011, less than 3 months after Medvedev renounced a second term as president so that Putin could reassume power, large protests broke out in Russia. The protests were triggered by electoral fraud, which many of the middle-class beneficiaries of the regime saw as an affront to their dignity. Of citizens and strategic buffers, Putin understands geopolitics as the product of strong men who sit around a table and decide the fates of nations. In other words, a few truly sovereign strong men dictate the fates of the smaller, not fully sovereign nations. The leaders and citizens of countries like Ukraine, in his view, fall into line or else. Putin's view of people, whether they're democracy protesters, representatives of civil society, or real terrorists, as tools in the hands of rival great powers, has been his most critical and enduring blind spot for the past 20 years. It also has real-world consequences. In late 2013, for example, with Viktor Yanukovych finally serving as the elected president of Ukraine, Putin thought that all he needed was to twist Yanukovych's arm into backing out of an association agreement with the European Union in exchange for a $15 billion loan. Putin could not grasp that the Euromaidan protests that then erupted in Kyiv were, just as in 2004, an expression of grassroots anger at having been deceived for the benefit of Putin and his insistence on keeping Ukraine under Russia's thumb. I hope you enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel for future updates. See you in the next video.